when a teenager who had built a successful modeling career at the age of 18 was found dead 10 yards away from her doorstep. Her family and the police were left clueless as to who could have savagely murdered her. In a bid to find answers, the investigators deployed the use of different resources to pinpoint the culprit. Luckily, by coincidence, a tiny bit of her killer's DNA will eventually be detected and justice will take its course. This case takes us to Croydon, London. Croydon is a large town in South London. It is one of the main commercial areas in Greater London, and it has a sizable shopping area. East Croydon serves as a vital centre for the nation's rail transportation network. The town is also well known for its streets art and creative murals that beautify public places. By the 20th century, Croydon was a significant industrial hub known for its metalworking, car manufacturing, and Croydon Airport. It also known for Whitgift Centre, the largest shopping centre in Greater London. In the year 2005, Croydon was considered a safe community as residents would often stay out late at night. The town had a thriving nightlife. People were often seen at bars and clubs at late hours. However, things changed when the news of Sally Ann Bowman's murder hit the community in shockwaves. Sally Ann Bowman was born in Carshalton, South London, on the 11th of September 1987 to Paul and Linda Bowman, who eventually divorced. While growing up, Sally had quite a large family. She was the youngest of 4 children with 3 older sisters named Nicole, Michelle, and Danielle. After their parents divorced, the girls continued to maintain a healthy relationship with them. Sally was a gracious young woman who was friendly, talented, and cheerful. Being responsible was a watchword for Sally Bowman. Since she became a teenager, she started thinking and acting like an actual adult. And in no time, she seemed to have had her life planned out. As a teenager, Sally already had a job and was living on her own in a rented apartment. She did not want to depend on her family financially, but she still gets to see them on a regular basis. While growing up, Sally Bowman had always loved arts and performance. She was a born performer. She wouldn't love anything more than singing, dancing, and entertaining. She frequently performs karaoke at the neighborhood's bar, singing delightfully, much to the enjoyment of her loved ones. Sally Ann was a complete package. She had the looks, the voice, and the acting talent which could have propelled her to success. As a teenager, her love for arts and performance made her join the Croydon-based Brit School for Performing Arts, whose alumni included Amy Winehouse, Adele, Katie Melua, and Tom Holland. Sally Bowman was an aspiring model, and her deciding to enroll in the Brit School for Performing Arts was a step further into achieving her desired goals, in which one included her becoming a professional model. Sally was a young woman who got her hands on different decent jobs which paid her bills and also promoted her career. After graduating high school, in 2004, she worked a part-time job as a hairstylist and a model. In the year 2005, her previous modeling jobs seemed to have caught the attention of Pulse Model Management, a popular London-based model agency who contacted her for a sign-up. Sally then began to participate in competitions. About a month later, she was already at the top of her game, achieving impressive breakthrough. Sally Bowman, after winning a competition, was able to land herself the title The Face of Swatch Watches, a popular watch brand in London. She also got the opportunities to grace the floors of many prestigious fashion shows in London. At the age of 18, Sally pretty much already had her life figured out. She had built a career for herself and was very successful at what she did. Anybody who knew Sally would know that one of her biggest dreams was to one day appear on the cover of Vogue. She had been compared to supermodel Kate Moss. However, Sally would not leave long to see what next step her found career would take her. On September 24, 2005, having worked tirelessly at the busy hair salon, Sally Bowman decided to spend her Saturday evening at her mother's house. She intended to relax and catch up with her mum before her elder sister, Nicole, comes to pick her up for a friend's birthday party. Since she turned 18 2 weeks ago, she was still in the mood to party in whatever form it comes. At exactly 5 p.m, Nicole arrives to pick her up, and as she leaves her mum's house, she waves goodbye and said a final, "I love you, mum." That same night, Sally's ex-boyfriend, Louis Sproston, and his friends were also out partying at a club in Kingston. Sally and her ex-boyfriend, Louis, had a shaky relationship. They had trouble trusting each other. Sally would often think Louis was likely hanging around with other girls, and Louis, on the other hand, was confident that any time Sally was out, she was probably flirting with other boys. That Saturday night, they had argue on their phones through texting, calling, and getting each other worked up. Their relationship was a standard teen romance. Amidst all these, Sally still managed to have a great time at the party. Around 10 p.m. at the Lloyd's bar, Sally could be seen with her sister and other friends having fun, partying, dancing, and socializing. At about 1 a.m. the next day, Sally and her sister left the bar. Outside the bar, her sister, Nicole, got into a fight and was later arrested by the police. Sally, who had called a taxi, waited outside the bar for 15 minutes before her taxi eventually arrived to take her to a friend's house. Sally did not stay long at her friend's. She later contacted her ex-boyfriend, Louis Sproston, who agreed to pick her up and to drop her at her home. The two decided to meet up at Croydon Town Centre. Sally then took a taxi and met up with Louis at the proposed location. They had broken up 2 weeks prior and have been trying to sort things out, but it seemed difficult. When Louis eventually arrived around 2:20, they both got into the car and were immediately on their way to Sally's house. During the drive, the duo got into an argument, each of them accusing the other of infidelity, which was a major contribution to their recent breakup. Finally, at Sally's home, they spent 2 hours bickering in the car outside her flat at Blenheim Crescent, South Croydon, until 4:15 when Sally got out of the car to walk to her door. Around the same time, a couple of neighbors were awakened by a strange noise that quickly turned into screams. They rushed to their windows to see if they could find the source of the noise, but nothing strange could be seen happening outside. They only noticed the back of an unidentified man walking down the streets about 5 minutes later. At around 6:30 a.m., one of the neighbors who came out of her house noticed something odd. Behind a construction container, she saw something which she initially thought was a mannequin leg, but on getting closer, she was met with a terrifying sight. Lying on the floor behind the container was the half-naked body of a dead woman who happened to be Sally Ann Bowman. The crime scene was immediately secured by the police. Although they were unable to locate the murder weapon, forensics eventually discovered the DNA of an unidentified man on Sally's body. They also determined that she had been sexually assaulted and had sustained at least 7 stab wounds from a sharp object. 3 of the stab wounds were so savage that they passed right through her body. Also, the unidentified lunatic had left numerous bite marks on her cheek, neck, and chest. Her handbag, cardigan, underwear, and mobile phone were also stolen. The news of Sally's death completely devastated her family. That morning, when her mother heard a knock at the door, she assumed Sally was behind the door, but it turned out to be police officials who came to tell her that her daughter, Sally, had been murdered. A few hours later, Sally's family, who were told to go identify her at the mortuary, hoped and prayed that the news of her death was all a mistake and that Sally was actually still alive. They eventually came out of denial when they realized it was really Sally that was lying dead on the mortuary slab. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation into Sally's murder. As part of the first phase of investigation, the detectives ran the DNA sample from Sally's body through the national databases for offenders, but that did not help in identifying the face of Sally's killer. Additionally, the absence of cameras at the crime scene made the investigation more challenging. Investigators were able to determine that Sally was murdered about 10 feet from her front door. The distance between where Lewis dropped her off and her apartment was also very short, which suggested that she was attacked almost immediately as she stepped down from the car. The police initial suspect was Lewis, since Sally was killed shortly after getting out of his car, and he was the last person to have seen her alive. Additionally, the couple's past fights and arguments did not go unchecked by the investigators, who thought Lewis might have something to do with his ex-girlfriend's murder. Many times, the couple's fight even went as far as calling the police to settle their differences, but no charges were ever filed. Lewis was apprehended by the police the same day after they tracked him down. During interrogation, he admitted that until the investigators themselves informed him about Sally's murder, he was not even aware that she had passed away. He confessed to the police that they had a heated argument earlier that morning, but he denied being a part of her murder. According to Lewis' account of what happened, he drove off as soon as Sally got out of his car. The detectives, however, were hesitant to believe his story because, at the time, available evidence did not seem to be in his favor. After a sample of his DNA was taken, he was then detained for 4 days as the police awaited the outcomes of the DNA tests. Lewis was eventually freed after it was determined that his DNA did not match the DNA sample found on Sally's body. During the DNA analysis testing, the forensics also found another intriguing information. The DNA sample on Sally's body was detected on a criminal case from 4 years ago. In the year 2001, a woman was making a phone call at a phone booth located in a parking lot of a convenience store. All of a sudden, she was attacked by an unknown man. The men stripped her naked and sexually molested her. Immediately, he had achieved his aim. He ran off and left his DNA on the floor of the phone booth. The victim then immediately went to the police station to report her ordeal. A DNA sample of the unknown perverts was then taken, tested, and attached to the case, though the police never succeeded in finding the offender. This incident occurred about 2.5 kilometers away from the scene where Sally was murdered. The authorities later realized they were dealing with a serial pervert who had managed to be on the loose for a very long time. The only concerns were how many women had been harmed by this psychopath and when he would strike again. He had to be apprehended by police before he destroyed someone else's life. It was immediately evident that the police's fears were not in vain because, an hour before Sally was killed, another woman had been attacked on a nearby street. While on her way home, she was on a phone call, speaking to someone when suddenly a man came up to her, apologized, and then quickly struck her. The shocked victim screamed and, out of fright, dropped her phone. What happened next wasn't what the attacker was expecting. Luckily for the shaken woman, a taxi driver appeared on the road and scared her attacker away. He immediately took the victim's phone and ran off. One spooky fact worth mentioning in this scenario is that the person the victim was speaking to on the phone was still on the line and could hear everything that happened. The attacked woman continued to scream for help even after her attacker stole her phone and vanished from her line of sight. Her continuous screams implied that the attacker was quietly hidden nearby. Maybe he was hoping the cab driver would pass by so that he could attack the victim once again. Thankfully, the cab driver noticed the woman's uneasiness and pulled over. He then made the woman sit in his cab and drove her to the hospital. While at the hospital, she dialed the police number and reported what had happened to her. She was then asked to describe the offender. She described the attacker as a white male between the ages of 25 to 30, around 180 centimeters tall, with short dark hair. Based on her description, the police created a sketch, which was later released to the media. Unfortunately, a lot of British males around the area fit this description. Detectives consequently got hundreds of calls from local residents. They all agreed that the sketch reminded them of a man they knew or had seen somewhere else. Police investigated each of these calls, but they never found anything. When they realized they could not locate the lunatic depicted in the sketch, the investigators chose to take a different route. The only lead the police had was the DNA found on the victim's body. The cops were also certain that the offender resided nearby. This was evident because he had also attacked a woman at a phone booth on one of the surrounding streets. In order to capture this crazy offender, the investigators made the decision to collect all DNA from the entire neighborhood. The occupants of every apartment and home were to be questioned by police officials and requested to voluntarily provide their DNA samples. Naturally, the police had no expectation that the offender would want to release his DNA, but it was enough to obtain a sample from his family members to help them find the offender. For instance, the individual might have lived with parents who are oblivious of his crimes and will voluntarily provide the police his DNA sample. The police, however, visited more than 6,000 addresses over the course of the following 6 months, and many locals gave them their DNA samples, but the entire endeavor was fruitless as neither the culprit nor his relatives could be found. Croydon residents were terrified the entire time, and police raids have simply made them more uneasy. They were all aware that a psychopath was roaming the streets. Women feared taking nighttime strolls. Parents wouldn't allow their kids to leave the house. Since they had no other information, the authorities were forced to refer back to the sketch. Both the victim from the phone booth and the woman who had been assaulted by the psychopath on the day that Sally was killed were contacted. They were asked to describe the perpetrator again, and the investigators adjusted the initial sketch based on their evidence. At a press conference, the police displayed the sketch and for the first time provided information about the crimes the man had committed that had previously been kept a secret. This was done in the hope that Croydon residents would become aware of how dangerous it is for such maniac to roam freely on their streets and take greater precautions. Sadly, none of these worked either. The revised sketch was overly generalized and did not significantly change from the initial one. The description also fitted thousands of men who resided in the area. However, what happened next surprised everyone. Unexpectedly, the case had a breakthrough in June 2006. In Crawley, West Sussex, a man was watching an England World Cup game with Trinidad at a bar while sipping on his drink. Having had too much to drink, he started arguing with another football fan. Their argument quickly escalated into a street brawl. Unfortunately for him, as he pushed his opponent to the ground, a police officer walked by. The police officer then captured the attacker and he was taken to the police station. While at the police station, Mark Dixie, the 35-year-old who started the fight, experienced a severe panic attack and burst into tears. This attitude surprised the police in Crawley, given that he had only been detained for a misconduct. The person he attacked didn't even file any charges against him. The police wondered why he felt so uneasy. At the time, he looked highly suspicious to the police, but they soon had to release him on bond, not knowing that the reason for his sudden outburst of emotion would soon be apparent. Prior to his release, the police took his DNA sample and captured his fingerprints, as it was the usual procedure for any form of criminal cases. After 12 days, the detectives got an unexpected news from the forensics department. They said the DNA sample discovered on Sally's body had been finally matched to the DNA sample the police had taken from Mark Dixie. Despite realizing they were dealing with a dangerous lunatic, when Mark Dixie was caught on street, initially, the cop had to let him go. This is because they were unable to keep him in custody any longer due to legal restrictions. Now that he had been confirmed as the maniac they had been looking for, the police had to rearrest him. Nearly a year after Sally Bowman's murder, on June 28, 2006, Mark Dixie was ultimately arrested while taking a cigarette break at work. The police discovered pictures of Sally Ann Bowman and videos of Mark Dixie committing despicable acts over them during a search warrant of his home. He was also discovered to be living few blocks away from Sally's home. Mark Dixie was accused of a long list of grave offences in court. After researching through his background, investigators discovered that he had a fairly extensive criminal history. When he was 16 years old in 1986, he committed his first crime. At the time, he lived in Stockwell and was using the name Mark MacDonald. He reportedly held a knife to the throat of a woman and then robbed and inappropriately assaulted her. Because of his age, he received a prison term of only 6 months. As Mark Dixie moved from place to place, he changed his name, but his obsession with sex and violence never changed. Mark Dixie was retried for robbery and molestation every year after his first crime. In June 1988, a Jehovah's parents' house nearby, where she raised the alarm, Mark Dixie ran away but was later caught and sentenced to 6 months in prison after pleading guilty at the last minute. In the year 1990, he was also detained for attacking a police officer. Unfortunately, the legal system was always in his favor in all these cases. He was only given little time, after which he comes out of detention to continue committing his crimes. Mark Dixie was said to have relocated with his then-girlfriend to Australia in 1993. While in Australia, he continued with his crimes. 5 years later, he broke into the home of a young woman, robbing her and abusing her. He was subsequently deported from the country in 1999 after being arrested and charged 3 times for assault. At the time, it was questioned why Australian authorities did not imprison Mark Dixie or at the very least put him on the list of sex offenders register for his crimes. He only paid a fine before he was deported. Unfortunately, at the time, the authorities were not yet taking DNA samples from criminals. Mark Dixie's DNA was taken from the body of Sally Bowman, but there were no matches in the national databases. Before bringing the case to court, the police had a lot of work to do. They soon learned that the night Sally was killed, Mark Dixie had been celebrating his birthday with friends at the Windsor Castle pub, a bar on Brighton Road, just a few hundred yards from Sally's house. While at the bar, he was seen arguing with his girlfriend on the phone before drowning in alcohol and illegal drugs for the rest of the evening. The whole time, he kept to himself and didn't interact much with people around him. Mark Dixie and 2 of his friends left the bar and went to a nearby residence at Avondale Road around 2:30 a.m. When they got to the apartment, he stayed on the couch and waited for his friends to fall asleep. He then locked them up in their rooms so that they wouldn't know he was out of the house. Mark Dixie later picked up a knife and left the house. After much investigation, it was later revealed that he was the one who attacked the lady who was rescued by a cab driver. Mark Dixie had left for another street that night, out of concern that the lady he attacked might call the police. Sadly, the street he eventually entered for the search of another prey was Sally Bowman's. He lurked in the dark, waiting in the corner until Lewis parked his car and Sally stepped out. Lewis, Sally's ex-boyfriend, had once mentioned during the investigation that on the night of Sally's murder, he had captured the image of an unknown man through his car's rear mirror when he had parked for Sally to get off, but he did not think much of it. Mark Dixie had suddenly jumped on Sally Bowman as she walked towards her front door. He then attacked her with his knife, sexually assaulted her, and ran away. He was the one the neighbors claimed to have seen walking down the street that night. He had later returned to his flat to sleep after killing Sally Bowman. The trial for Mark Dixie started on February 5, 2008 at the Old Bailey. Rather than owning up to his wrongdoings, he fabricated a preposterous story. According to him, he was simply strolling through the streets when he noticed Sally Bowman sprawled on the ground. He said he took advantage of the situation to assault her and then fled. He claimed Sally had been killed by another person. Mark Dixie allegedly said he didn't know that Sally was even dead. During the trial, he was described as a freeloader who used people, and many acquaintances came forward to tell their stories. A woman from Australia who Dixie had assaulted in 1998 also served as a witness during the trial. According to the woman, he had assaulted her and stabbed her 7 times. Luckily, she survived. After the trial, on the 22nd of February, the jury unanimously decided that Mark Dixie was responsible for killing Sally Ann Bowman. The court condemned him to life in prison, with a minimum of 34 years in prison notwithstanding his absurd past. After his convictions, Sally's mother, Linda Bowman, said, "We now know he was arrested at least 3 times in Australia, but he was deported without any warnings being issued by the authorities. They didn't do their job properly, and that's the reason my daughter's dead." Mark Dixie was often moved from one prison to another after his sentence, and this was because a cellmate often bullied him and attempted to kill him. Amidst all these, Mark Dixie continued to deny his role in Sally's killing. It wasn't until 2015, 10 years later, that he finally admitted to being the one responsible for Sally's death. His confession did not make his sentence worse, but the authorities were able to prove that he was responsible for other crimes. In the year 2017, it was discovered that a Dutch citizen had wrongly gone to prison for 12 years for allegedly committing a despicable offense over 3 women in Spain. However, when proper investigation was carried out, years later, it became clear that Mark Dixie was actually the one who had committed the crimes and not the Dutch man. Mark Dixie also voluntarily admitted to committing another crime when he was 16 years old. In a parking lot, Dixie reportedly assaulted a woman in her car. He afterwards stole from her, tied her to the car door, and set ablaze the front seats of her vehicle. She, however, was able to escape. Later that evening, Mark Dixie found her home phone number and contacted her. He went on to taunt the woman, who eventually fled her house and started living on the countryside, since she was unable to cope with the trauma. Mark Dixie also went on to admit to a depraved acts in 2002. He had sexually assaulted a woman on a set of stairs and bludgeoned her with a knife sharpener, though she miraculously survived the attack. In total, he had 17 other convictions for criminal acts, and in 2017, Mark Dixie received a second life sentence because he was found guilty of abusing 2 women in Croydon in 1987 and 2002. The year 2017 was also characterized by a negative incident. Sally Bowman's grave experienced continuous vandalism by unknown vandals. Her family had to face a second trauma as they were forced to exhume her remains. She was cremated and her ashes was kept at home. After all these ordeals, Sally's mother became a fervent supporter of the need for having a national DNA database. According to her, if the government obtained DNA samples from every citizen of Great Britain, crimes would be solved in 24 hours as opposed to 9 months. The woman was also positive that Sally's ex-boyfriend, Lewis, would have been sentenced to life in prison for a murder he did not commit if the killer had not left his DNA at the crime scene. The lead investigator who worked on Sally Bowman's case, Detective Superintendent Stuart Cundy, agreed with the idea of a national database, but the government opposed the National DNA Database Plan. They believed that forcing DNA samples out of the citizens would be against fundamental human rights. This subject is very debatable. On one hand, a database like this would significantly speed up the investigation of crimes. Also, some criminals might be scared off from committing such atrocities altogether, knowing that they could be caught very easily. However, not all criminals leave their DNA behind at the crime scene. On the other hand, disclosing or abusing data from such a database might seriously hurt law-abiding citizens. What do you think about the Sally Bowman's case? Do you think Sally Bowman's mum is right about having a national DNA database? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment.
On June 19, 2020, some TikToker teens discovered a dismembered body wrapped in a suitcase on the Alki Beach in Seattle. It appeared that these teens were sent to the location by coincidence through an application called Randonautica, an American application owned by Presley Media. The app's accurate location interface enables it to take users on unplanned adventures. Nobody, not even the user, has any idea where they are going or what they will discover. This eerie random adventure application directs its users to explore random places while only requesting for their location. However, you can decide how far you can go from your present location. On getting to the beach, these teens spotted a black suitcase on the rocky area close to the water. Initially, they thought it was a bag of money, but when they got closer to it, there was an uncomfortable smell emanating from the suitcase. Out of curiosity, they used a stick to open the suitcase, discovering something wrapped up in a plastic bag. At this point, the smell was everywhere, hence, they decided to call 911 to report a mysterious black suitcase with some foul odor coming from it. 2 hours later, after their arrival, officers searched the Alki Beach and discovered the contents in the suitcase to be human remains. They shut down the beach for further clues. 3 days later, the deputies discovered another suitcase with human remains near the 1000 block of West Marginal Place, near the Seattle City Light Power Substation. The King County Medical Examiner's Office identified the victims to be Austin Wenner and Jessica Lewis, who were 27 and 35 years old respectively. It was found that both were shot to death. Jessica died from multiple gunshots while Austin died from a single gunshot to his torso. Jessica's aunt, Gina, said her niece, who was born in Maple Valley, had worked at Laura's adult family home, an assisted living facility where she supported older and developmentally disabled adults. Jessica was said to have had the grace and patience to be able to do that. Gina said her niece had a big heart and was willing to help anyone who needed anything. Jessica was also a mother to 4 kids. As at June 2020, 2 of her kids were said to have completed their high school. One was still in middle school while the other was old enough to know what was happening. Austin, who was also a native of Washington, was from Kent and was fondly called Cash. The couple had been together for 8 years and were said to have experienced difficult times, but they always managed to stick together. Austin's family at the time of his death wished to mourn their son in private, but his mother had this to say about her son: he had faith, a big heart, and loved the outdoors, country music, campfires, trucks, dogs, Jessica, and his family. After reaching out to the victim's family and friends, the police discovered that the couple were last seen at a home on Ambaum Boulevard South in Burien. Police learned the house belonged to Michael Dudley. To commence investigation, a search warrant for Dudley's home was served on August 19, 2020, where detectives found bullet holes, bullet strikes, spent rounds, and a small smear of blood in the room where Jessica and Austin had been staying. Reports said Dudley could not explain to investigators how the bullet damage occurred. It was also reported that the room was recently cleaned and painted in an attempt to wipe off any evidence. Unfortunately for Dudley, the forensics were able to see beyond the cleanliness of the room and discovered a smear of Austin's blood. Dudley was taken into custody for questioning. It was later discovered that on June 9, 2020, Jessica and Austin, who had been renting a room from Dudley at his Burien home along Ambaum Road since December 2019, got into an argument with him over their $1,500 monthly unpaid rent. Dudley confessed to having an argument with them and being in possession of a gun but denied killing them. However, further interview with his neighbors led to his conviction. Upon interview, a neighbor told the police that they called 911 on June 9, 2020 after hearing gunfire inside Dudley's home and hearing a man shouting, "Please don't do this, just let me leave." Prosecutors said Burien police officers went to the home that night but did not get a response when they knocked on the door, so they left. That same night, another witness who newly moved into Dudley's house claimed she arrived to the residence late after Jessica and Austin had been murdered. She said she observed the outline of a person below a heap of clothing with a damaged arm sticking out in the room Austin and Jessica were staying. The lady further told officers that Dudley requested her to leave and come back the next day so he could clean up his mess. However, she never returned until several days. Also, Austin's father went to Dudley's residence after being unable to reach Jessica or his son. He was then informed by Dudley that the couple had left. Austin's father later spotted his son's clothing in the trash. He immediately recognized it as his. Following his arrest, Dudley's ex-girlfriend, Gordon, who couldn't believe he had committed such horrible crime, described him as a violent individual who had been arrested and charged for physically assaulting her before in 2016. Also, his daughter, who now uses a different name, stated in a court document that Dudley sexually assaulted her for 9 years from age 10 until age 18. She said Dudley would force her to share a bed with him and make her watch while he watched porn and masturbated. If she resisted, he would threaten to kill her with a firearm. Jessica's aunt, Gina, told Westside Seattle that Dudley was a sicko who would sometimes break the late victim's car so they couldn't leave. He was said to put trackers on people's cars. Anytime he ever got in a dispute with anyone, he would tell them to leave but try to lock them in the house. He once killed a dog in front of the victims and left the carcass outside the house for 3 days to scare them. Dudley beat the dog to death with a hammer because it got one of his chickens. He left it out there for the other dogs to look at and sniff. According to Gina, Dudley was a freaking psycho. She mentioned that there was once an electrician guy who worked for Dudley and they had an argument. Dudley told the guy to leave but still wouldn't let him leave. He further threatened the guy with a gun and 911 was called. According to prosecutors, Dudley shot both victims, then butchered their bodies and stuffed the remains into suitcases, which he then threw into different bodies of water. 10 days later, on Alki Beach in West Seattle, 3 teenagers were filming TikTok videos when they discovered the suitcases containing human body parts, filming their horrifying discovery. TikTok, however, received criticism for refusing to remove the graphic video after the video swiftly gained 30 million views. The social media platform claimed that the video was not graphic enough for removal, seeing that the victim's actual body were not recorded. Nonetheless, after several months, the video was subsequently removed either by TikTok or by the teenager who posted it on the platform. Speculations on whether Dudley committed the crime alone was initially a debate due to the disorganized manner in which Jessica and Austin's body were dismembered. After 2 years, Mike Dudley was found guilty of second-degree murder for the killings of Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner. Dudley's sentencing is scheduled for March 10, 2023, where he might likely face a life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Families of the murdered couple who were present in court welcomed the guilty verdicts, saying that justice has been served. "The world is a safer place without Michael Dudley in it," said Austin's mother, Charlene Creans. Everybody can rest easy tonight because of that. May the souls of Austin and Jessica continue to rest in peace. Leave your prayer for the victims in the comments. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more crime stories.